Okay, Phil Lee returning with another episode of Civil War Chat. Today is Wednesday, the 9th of December, and today's talk will be on exploding the lost cause myth. And before we get started, I want to recommend that you click on the notification bell in the upper right, and that way when you click, after you click on the bell, you'll become a subscriber and you'll be notified every time I have a new video. Secondly, since I'm going to be talking about exploding the myth of the lost cause, I want to bring your attention to this book, The Confederacy at Flood Tide, written by me, which is about the period from June 1862 to December of 1862, when the South had its best chance of winning Southern independence, before the odds became too overwhelming against them. Now, to get this, you can buy it at Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any fine bookstore. Just go there and get them to, if they don't have it in stock, to order it. Or you can get it online at Amazon or at Barnes & Noble or any other online bookstore. I think it's priced at $28 at Amazon. If you want a signed copy, you can get it from me. But what you need to do is to email me at Phil, P-H-I-L _Lee, L-E-I-G-H @me.com. Let me know that you want it. I can get it to you by Christmas if you move along. My price will be $31, but I will cover the postage if you live in the United States. Again, there's the book. Perhaps you can see also the spelling of my name there at the bottom, Philip Lee. So if you want to get that for Christmas, get it signed, you can contact me. If you just want to buy it, go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble and order it there. Now, let me just pull up my notes and I'll get started on my talk about exploding the myth of the lost cause. Academic historians widely deny a tenet of this so-called lost cause myth, that the North won the Civil War because of its overwhelming manpower and economic advantages. The South, they eagerly argue, could have readily won the war despite the North's numerical and resource advantages, even though those advantages were decidedly overwhelming. Now consider the following examples. In explaining the Confederate defeat, the lost cause says that the main factor was not qualitative inferiority in the leadership or fighting ability of the Confederate soldier, but the massive quantitative superiority of the Yankee industrial machine. That's what the Wikipedia says. And you can find that article, Lost Cause of the Confederacy. Wikipedia is a good indicator of what the academics are teaching, because these are basically people out of school that couldn't get a better job. But they're parroting what they learned in school. Okay, here's the second example. Ultimately, in the lost cause interpretation, a unified South did not really lose the war, but was simply overwhelmed by the manpower and material resources of the North. Few scholars today, however, accept it as an accurate portrayal of the history of the era. That is by Dr. Carl H. Moneyhon, who is a Civil War and Reconstruction historian. Here's the third example. To adherents of the lost cause, the Confederacy fought to uphold the supposed virtues of the antebellum South, advanced by leaders who were exemplars of old-fashioned chivalry, and was defeated by the Union armies, not through superior military school, but by overwhelming force. Historical scholarship in recent decades has since disabused Civil War students of the merits of this ideology. And that is by Daniel Lewis, who wrote for the Smithsonian Magazine in October 20th, 2016. The Venerable James McPherson, professor emeritus at Princeton University, argues that other nations won independence against greater odds than did the Confederacy. Among the examples adduced is the success of the United States during our war for independence. Yet McPherson overlooks the relative casualties. Soldier deaths during the American Revolutionary War totaled 25,000, which was about 1% of the population. In contrast, at least 300,000 Confederate soldiers died during the Civil War, which was about 5% of the available white population. And incidentally, assuming that a larger 400,000 Northern soldiers died during the Civil War, their loss ratio would be under 2% as compared to 5% for the Confederacy. Thus, the Confederate death ratio was 5 times the rate of the Revolutionary War, and it was in half the time. Such casualties were unsustainable. If, for example, America were to engage in a war today and endure the same proportional losses, the number of dead soldiers would total nearly 17 million. And no doubt 30 or 40 years from now, we'd want to put up statues to them unless somebody came up with some phony excuse for why they were offensive to them or somehow violated political correctness. Now, let me go on and proceed. Another historian suggests that Robert E. Lee planted, this is Brooks Simpson, he suggests that Robert E. planted the seed of the Lost Cause version of Southern military defeat when the general declared at Appomattox on April 9th, 1865, that his men had fought honorably, but were overwhelmed by superior Northern resources and numbers. Yet Grant himself apparently agreed with Lee when he described his strategy for winning the war as commander of all the Union armies in a letter he wrote in July 22nd, 1865. Let me clarify. Grant became commander of all the Union armies in March of 1864. Lee surrendered in April 9th, 1865. And about 3 months later, Grant sends a letter to Henry Halleck in Washington and basically Grant's describing how he won the war is during that period when he was commander of all the Union armies. Quote, "The resources of the enemy and his numerical strength were far inferior to ours. I therefore determined to hammer continuously against the armed force of the enemy and his resources until by mere attrition, if in no other way, there should be nothing left to him but submission." Close quote. Other contemporary Northerners shared the opinion that the South could only be defeated by overwhelming numbers. Henry J. Raymond, who was chairman of the Republican National Committee, advisor to President Lincoln, and editor of the New York Times, as well as founder, wrote in the fall of 1864, quote, "The rebels have exhibited a most wonderful energy and skill. No people on earth ever made such a hard fight with such limited means. All candid men, whatever their hatred of the rebellion, are free to admit the final triumph of our national armies will be due only to superiority in numbers." Close quote. Charles Wainwright, who was a leading artillerist with the Union Army opposing Lee, wrote at the latter's surrender, quote, "The Army of Northern Virginia under Lee today has surrendered. During 3 long, hard-fought campaigns, it has withstood every effort of the Union Army of the Potomac. Now it is obliged to succumb without even one great pitched battle. The rebellion has been worn out rather than suppressed." Close quote. When newspaperman William Swinton, who often accompanied the Union Army of the Potomac on its campaigns, published Campaigns of the Army of the Potomac a year after the war ended, he wrote of Lee's surrender, quote, "The Army of Northern Virginia fell before the power of the North. Yet what vitality it has shown!" Exclamation point. "How terrible the struggle!" Exclamation point. Close quote. Even Lincoln agreed that the North had overwhelming resources relative to the South. His frustration at the inability of large Union armies to vanquish smaller rebel ones, particularly in the Eastern Theater, is well known. Upon meeting with the commander of the Army of the Potomac and a subordinate on the eve of the Battle of Chancellorsville in 1863, he said, quote, "I want to impress upon you two gentlemen, in the next fight, put in all of your men," close quote. Finally, after visiting 9 of the 11 Confederate states in 1863, Lieutenant Colonel Arthur J.L. Fremantle of Her Majesty's Coldstream Guards departed for home from New York shortly after observing the Battle of Gettysburg. He wrote of his brief time in Philadelphia and New York after 3 months in the Confederacy. He wrote of his brief time in Philadelphia and in New York, quote, "The luxury and comfort of New York and Philadelphia strike one as extraordinary after having come from Charleston and Savannah and Richmond. The streets are as full as possible of well-dressed people and are crowded with able-bodied men capable of bearing arms, who evidently have no intention of doing so. They apparently," and he writes this in italics for emphasis, "they apparently don't feel the war at all here. I can easily imagine that they will not be anxious to make peace," close quote. Evidently, Shelby Foote was correct in remarking that the North could have fought the Civil War with one hand tied behind its back. I think he said that some 30 years ago, if not longer. But such a conclusion is forbidden among the academic historians, where the agenda is to portray the Confederate military as inferior. Adam Dombey, for example, of the College of Charleston, goes so far as to ridicule and laugh at the Confederate soldiers' reputation. I've underscored here with a link in the text where you can watch the video where he actually does that. He's being interviewed and he laughs at the Confederate soldier and he gets the interviewer to laugh at him as well. Nonetheless, the Southerner has a warrior tradition that still lives. 44% of our nation's volunteer army currently come from the South, although the region accounts for only 36% of the national population. Okay, again, what I want to do is to recommend this book to you. Let me pull it up here. The Confederacy at Flood Tide. It's going to give you a good analysis of the strategic denouement, the strategic and tactical history of the war from June 1862 to December 1862, when the South could have won because they were fighting to win the war quickly before the North's superior economic resources could wear them down. Philip Lee, The Confederacy at Flood Tide, would be a great Christmas present. If you want an unsigned copy, you can get it online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. If you want a signed copy, get it from me. Email me, Phil_Lee, Leigh, at me.com. Okay, thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again.